to be putting it on. So you should have just heard a recording in progress.
Yes.
We'll be streaming it on Facebook in however long it takes for that connection. And then while I'm waiting for that to be set up, if you would prefer to have subtitles, the subtitles are enabled. They're automatically generated. They are pretty good. In your options at the bottom or top of the screen, depending on what sort of technology you're using, there is, you'll see something that says live transcript. That is how you see the subtitles. Otherwise, give me 1 second to get through this little Facebooky thing, which always takes slightly longer than I think it will. But anyway, welcome to Texans Abroad. My name is Eileen Dinnan. You won't hear from me again. I'm just doing the tech for this. And I'm setting up our live stream right now. I know I don't sound very Texan, but I did my master's degree at the wonderful University of Texas in Austin. And so I am therefore a Texas voter. That was the last city I lived in. And yeah, give me 1 second. That should have worked, but I have to check as always.
I think we're live. So I think we are.
Are we live?
We are live,
Thank
everyone.
you, Candace. All right. We're live and yeah, take it away.
Great. All right. Well, on that note, a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. We are now live on Facebook. Thank you to everyone tuning in there. If you do have a question for one of the candidates today, you can pop that in either in the Q&A box for those of you on Zoom, or for just in the chat comment on Facebook, and we will be sure to capture those questions and get them to the candidates. I think that's it for logistics at the moment. And just again, a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening to all of our guests, to all of our Democrats Abroad members, really to everyone who is joining this really unique event from all around the world. It is our first Meet the Candidate series, or first event rather, in our Meet the Candidate series this year. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, and I see a lot of new names on the screen, which is very exciting. My name is Candace Kerriston, and I serve as Democrats Abroad's International Chair. For those of you who might be less familiar with Democrats Abroad, or perhaps this is your first event, Democrats Abroad is the largest organization of US citizens living outside of the United States, and we're also an official arm of the Democratic Party. At our core, it's our mission to provide Americans abroad a voice in our government back home and elect Democratic candidates by mobilizing the overseas vote. As everyone on this call knows, there is so much at stake this year in the United States. 34 US Senate seats, all 435 US representative seats, 46 state legislatures, including in Texas, and 36 state governorships, again, in Texas. These are the decisions, these are the offices rather, where the decisions impacting you as an American abroad, your family and friends back home are being made. If you haven't done so yet, request your ballot for all 2022 elections, including Texas's March 1st primary election at votefromabroad.org. Just a few last quick notes about today's event. As we sat down at Democrats Abroad, reflected on 2020, looked ahead to 2022, we were really determined to bring the elections and the issues closer to you, Americans abroad, so that you know who and what is on your ballot when you get it, and so that lawmakers stateside know about the issues unique to you and their overseas constituents. Every time I send out an email, I'm sure you've received some from Democrats Abroad too, I get a slew of responses back concerning the direction of the party, Democrats Abroad. I get people saying the party's moving too far in one direction or too far in the other. And I think that's the unique element about primary elections too, as we look ahead, is this is really your chance to determine who you want to face off against the Republican in November. This is your chance to determine the future of the Democratic Party. So again, please request your ballot at votefromabroad.org and really enjoy what the candidates have to say today. In this vein, I just want to thank the Texas State team, Texans Abroad, for organizing today's event, and especially to all of the candidates who made time out of their busy campaign schedules to speak with Democrats abroad. Lastly, I just want to note that Democrats Abroad as a state party has not endorsed any candidate and is committed to remaining neutral for the duration of the Texas primary. All candidates for the above races were invited to speak at our events. On that note, I'll toss it over to Jennifer von Esdorf, who leads Texans Abroad. Jennifer?
Thanks so much, Candace. Welcome to our Texans Abroad Meet the Primary Candidates panel, the first of its kind for our Texans Abroad group. We welcome candidates from the offices of Land Commissioner, the 35th Congressional District, and Attorney General. I'm Jennifer von Esdorf, the Democrats Abroad Global State Teams Coordinator, and also representing Texans Abroad. I was born and raised in Abilene, Texas, and have lived in Germany for the last 20 years. It has been my great pleasure to be a part of the team helping to establish our state-focused outreach and our efforts to assist and encourage Texans living overseas to cast their vote up and down the ballot. In fact, we already increased the number of ballots returned to Texas by 50% from overseas, up to 60,000 in 2020 compared to 40,000 in 2016. Close to 90,000 overseas voters requested a Texas ballot in 2020, which shows us just how key the work is to ensure that Texans living outside the US can make their voices heard. We'd love for you to join us on February 12th for our next Texans Abroad planning meeting as well. Today, we'll hear from two candidates for the office of the Commissioner of the Texas General Land Office. The General Land Office manages Texas's publicly owned lands and helps fund public education through the royalties and proceeds from land sales, which are added to the Permanent School Fund. The GLO also helps Texans recovering from natural disasters, provides benefits to Texas veterans, manages the vast Texas coastline, and even operates the Alamo. Our first candidate is Jay Kleberg, born and raised on a working ranch in South Texas. Growing up, Jay developed a deep respect for the land and the meaning of hard work. He learned that our individual freedoms do not negate our responsibility to one another. Those values have helped define his career as Associate Director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, documentary film producer, and a co-founder of the startup business Explore Ranches. Jay is running to put the focus of the GLO back to where it belongs, respecting the land, funding our children's future, and being a responsible steward protecting the public and economic health of Texas. We look forward to hearing about your campaign for the Office of Land Commissioner. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much. I spent about 3.5 years in the southeastern Amazon basin trying to protect tropical forest. And what I realized in that time was the foundations for conservation and the ability to conserve something in perpetuity really existed back in the United States and specifically in Texas. And so in 2004, came back to Texas to do work both in land management and natural resource conservation. As Jennifer said, have been doing work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation as Associate Director, did work for the National Park Service while I was in business school at UT, and have traveled all over the state doing film work with a film that will come out here in the next few months that will be narrated by Matthew McConaughey and is Our Planet or Planet Earth for Texas. And the reason that we decided to do that film is I grew up with a show called Mutual of Omaha, and it was sort of our natural history show. And I didn't know much growing up in South Texas about the rest of the world. And what I've realized over the last 40 years is there's so much vibrancy in the state of Texas alone, and so many people in Texas that don't have access to that. In part, that's why I went to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. In part, that's why I developed a company to provide access to private lands. Texas is 95% privately owned. And what I've seen in the 20 years of my professional career is everything that we love in the state of Texas is at risk due to climate change. And the leaders that we have at the top of our leadership in the state of Texas have ignored the warning signs. We're number one in CO2 emissions in the United States. We lead the nation in billion-dollar natural disasters. And in Texas alone, just in the next 10 years, we'll see a doubling of 100-degree days. not to mention that we're 45th in quality of our education. And this particular office has been used as a stepping stone. For the last 20 years, those who have held this office have utilized it as a place to gain favor from special interests and then look to a higher office, whether that be lieutenant governor, or in this case with the current office holder, George P. Bush, for attorney general. It's an open seat. And I can tell you that the work of the office has been my life's work. And I know that the General Land Office can lead the way in a low emission economy. We see Houston and San Antonio have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. But where is the state of Texas in that pledge? I think the General Land Office can lead the way in the climate economy by storing 700 years worth of industrial carbon emissions in our submerged lands off the Texas coast, that we can lead the way in the low emission future by diversifying our renewable energy portfolio to ensure that, as Texas 2036, a policy shop out of Dallas has said, we will see a 30% decline in public school funding revenues because roughly 20% of our revenues come from oil and gas. We'll see that 30% decline over the next 25 years. And so we have to make up for that income. And that's in geothermal, it's in wind, it's in solar, it's in offshore wind. And what I know is that we can do this because we've done it before. In very recent history, we lead the nation in wind energy. We're number 2 in solar. And we're developing large-scale carbon center here in Houston, where I am today. We're developing carbon sequestration and credit markets, and that the General Land Office has the ability to elevate these issues to fight climate change. And in my 20 years of experience as a land conservationist, natural resource manager, as an entrepreneur, and as a filmmaker, I'm ready to get to work. And I appreciate that you all have taken time out of all of your different time zones to actually be here and to listen to us, because this is a really important, not only office, but this particular election cycle is important for the General Land Office because we basically have about 10 years to take action on climate change. And it is here. I've seen it in the Amazon. I've seen the changes there, and I know that it's at our doorstep. So I'll end there and just appreciate your time.
All right. We're going to make a slight change to our schedule this morning for our caucus leaders asking questions because Lee needs to leave at 8:30. So we're going to have a question for Jay from our Global Black Caucus, and then we can go ahead and skip over to Lee for a second. So James, would you like to ask the question that you've got highlighted here in the?
Sure. Thanks, Jay. Thanks for taking time out. I'm a Texas voter myself, and I'm from Dallas County. I'm from Hong Kong. How will you ensure that people of color who are prominent living in areas that filled with pesticides, lead pipes, and other hazards have the same access to rebuild their homes and livelihoods after a climate catastrophe?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, there's about $14 billion in backlog HUD Community Development Block Grant disaster relief funds and mitigation funds at the GLO. So the first thing that I would do is get those monies out the door. Those are monies that date back to natural disasters in communities who can least afford the impacts of a natural disaster 8, 9, and 10 years back. So that would be the first thing that I would do, is ensure that that backlog gets out into those communities who have been affected. And then 2, make sure that when we do have a natural disaster, that those funds get through the General Land Office into those communities as quickly as possible, because it doesn't help those communities if they're just trying to rebuild their homes and their infrastructure. Some of that, as you said, is not just residential or multifamily, but it's actually the road systems as well, and water infrastructure, that those funds get out quickly, because 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, they have rebuilt more than likely, but not in the way that they could, that can withstand the next natural disaster. And the last thing that I would say is, if you look at the way that housing, urban development, community development, block grant, disaster relief funds come into the state of Texas, that it's dealt with on a disaster by disaster basis. And the reality is that we have seen natural disasters almost every year in the state of Texas, and we see it all over the United States. And so what I would fight for at the federal level is a bill that would permanently authorize those funds and that program, the HUD CDBG DR, so that we're not dealing with it on a disaster by disaster basis, but that we are treating it almost like a fire department. It's funded. We know that we can have projects pre-approved. We know where those natural disasters are going to occur, so that if it takes 3 months for those funds to get out of the federal level, we can deploy them quickly, rather than dealing with it almost like a grant program. And there's a lot of repetition there. And so I would make sure that those communities get those funds and that they're to the standards that will withstand the next 50 to 100 years of weather, and not based on modeling and infrastructure that is dependent upon the last 100 years of weather patterns, which is essentially how we are doing our modeling right now.
Thank you.
Excellent. We'll go to our Progressive Caucus now for a question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Kennedy, representing the Global Progressive Caucus today, from Houston originally. And just wanted to say a quick word about the Progressive Caucus. We're really right now trying to inform all of our members, all of Democrats abroad and Americans abroad in general, about key primary races this cycle. And we really want to engage voters early and focus on these crucial challenges that we're all confronting right now, and make sure that we're prepared to vote for candidates who really want to address those challenges effectively. So to that end, our chair, Bruce Murray, is going to pop some resources in the chat for everyone on the call about our Pivotal Primaries project, which is we're focusing on my home state of Texas first. So it's really exciting that this forum has been organized today. Thank you, everyone. And now our question for you, Jay, you really touched on a lot of the things that we wanted to ask about, responding to these weather events and making sure the state is resilient against climate change. But maybe more specifically now, what can you do as land commissioner to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and improve our electric grid?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we've really focused on. So number one is taking a look at the fact that we've got 6 million acres of the 13 in renewable, in minerals only. So no surface. Those are all what are called Relinquishment Act lands. And so ensuring that not only do we have a revenue stream through those minerals for public education, but also that those operators are operating sustainably. And so looking at methane capture, preventing venting, and also the recycle and reuse of produced water. So that would be number one. And those are on new leases. You can't necessarily go back and grandfather the leases that have already been signed, but making sure that you have responsible operators on the land that are overtop those minerals. The second is we've got about 1 million acres in fee simple or just surface land. A lot of that is out in the Big Bend region. Doing a study to ensure that we know where we can put solar, where we can put wind, and also taking a look at geothermal in those areas and where those transmission lines are that make it feasible to adopt some of those technologies there. So helping with the transition. In our submerged lands, we have a huge store of the capability for offshore wind. And offshore wind, if placed appropriately, and I grew up on the coast and I'm a conservationist, and so I worry about the Central and the Mississippi Flyway and those migratory patterns. But if we can place those in areas where they aren't as sensitive where we can shut them down, for instance, with LiDAR technology. When you have flocks of birds migrating through, that offshore wind is actually, based on the modeling, can help to not only diversify the grid, but when the wind isn't blowing in West Texas, in most cases, it's blowing in the Gulf of Mexico. So ensuring that we're looking at diversification of our renewable technology and that energy. And then also going back to one quick thing and a comment in the chat as well, is that we have the technology right now to store CO2 safely 10,000 feet down in submerged lands in a saline layer. And those CO2 emissions are coming from industrial emissions. And as I said before, we lead the nation in CO2 emissions. The state of Texas does. And so we could take that point source and safely put it into our submerged lands. And in doing so, we can also generate revenue for the permanent school fund. And so, and there's some other things like blockchain technology and cryptocurrency mining that I'm still, the debate for me is how much energy is that pulling, and is the positive of being able to place some of that cryptocurrency mining in areas where you otherwise wouldn't have renewables, because they need clean and efficient and low cost energy, so that you're actually building out more renewable infrastructure than you might not have had otherwise. So there's a lot of amazing stuff out there, but you have got to have a Democrat in that office who is thinking about these things and willing to bring people to the table and isn't afraid of these technologies and saying the words climate change, because that is what has held us back in the last 20 years.
Excellent. Jay, thank you so much for joining us. We know that you've got a hard cutoff at 25 past, and we really thank you for your time and for coming to speak to Democrats Abroad and sharing your thoughts on this office. And we wish you the best of luck in the rest of the race, and let us know if there's anything that you can do for us. And please spread the word that Democrats can vote from abroad and send them to us. We're happy to help them with that process.
We'll do it. Thank you so much. I wish I could stay on for longer.
We appreciate your time. Thank you. And we're going to hop over to Lee Merritt now. We'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Lee. He's a candidate for the Office of Attorney General. Lee is an American constitutional attorney who has been an advocate for communities and families involved in the most important cases of our time. He's a national leader on issues of justice, civil liberties, and governmental accountability, and a champion for families across America whose rights and liberties have been trampled. Lee, we look forward to hearing your vision for the Office of Attorney General.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And thank you for showing some flexibility in the schedule. Like Jay, I have another hard cutout. And so I didn't want to spend too much time just rattling off things to you. I want to be able to answer some questions. I appreciate that introduction. That was more or less my background. I will say to our Democrats abroad, thank you so much for continuing to advocate for families, communities, and outcomes within the state. As a constitutional attorney involved in some of the cases like Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, Tatiana Jefferson, and other cases that have garnered international attention, I'm always surprised to see brothers and sisters in Switzerland and Germany and Toronto weighing in on these issues and seeing it covered in the media there. And I even had a chance to present 9 of my clients to an international commission through the United Nations to continue to put pressure on the state of Texas to adopt policies that are in line with, international best practices or even our own treaties. To have your voice in perspective involved in some of these cases and policies, such as creating mental health departments in the state of Texas during our what the Governor Greg Abbott described as a mental health crisis, really goes behind a lot of the policies and a lot of the changes that I would like to see come through the Attorney General's office, or to at least receiving 1 or 2 questions so I can engage you on those points. But with that, I will hold my tongue. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. We're going to go over to our Global Women's Caucus, and Sally has a question for you.
Yeah, hi, Lee. I, along with Carol, represent the Global Women's Caucus today. And I need to share with you how shocked we are at the Texas law SB 8, which outlaws abortion and gives vigilantes the right to take the law into their own hands. So I'd like to ask you, is this issue important to you? And could you share with your women voters why we would trust a man to make decisions over our bodies? Thank you.
This issue is critically important, and it's important for the very reason inferred in the latter part of that question. Women in Texas are full and equal citizens entitled to all the rights that any other citizens enjoys. I'm sorry, they ought to be, but SB 8 begins to trample on those, saying that women should not have full control, authority, and autonomy over their reproductive rights. That is an issue that has come down through the Texas legislator in the form of SB 8, and it was the responsibility of the Attorney General early on to offer an opinion that the law, as it's described in SB 8, allowing bounty hunts on women and deferring the responsibility of enforcing that unconstitutional law, the law that flies in the face of the well-established tenets of Roe v. Wade. If we gave the authority to the Attorney General's office to sue people who are helping women in Texas receive health care, then it would be automatically struck down. The 87 legislator did what they could by trying to go around it and assigning that responsibility to other people. It is still unconstitutional. We look foolish before the United States Supreme Court making the argument that because the Attorney General's office is not enforcing the law, that it is somehow no longer unconstitutional. From day one, I will withdraw our arguments in those cases and work with the Department of Justice to continue in the U.S. Attorney's Office to continue to protect the rights of Texas women. But we know that in June of next year, June of this year, this summer, that the issue of the protections offered by Roe v. Wade will go before the United States Supreme Court, and we must do more than simply back out of the protection of a heartbeat bill that we always knew would fail because it abjectly or directly goes against the tenets of the law. But we must work to codify the protections of Roe v. Wade as they continue to be attacked across the states. And I will continue to work with our partners in Washington, D.C., which I have already begun to do with my practice, and put pressure on our congressional memberships to legislate around the issue of women's rights, particularly concerning the right to make their own reproductive decisions.
Lee, thank you so much. I guess this is do you need to leave us now or do you have time for one more question?
If it's 8:30, I need to go. I'm so sorry. I'll try to get filled in one more if possible.
It is half past, so we want to be respectful of your time.
I couldn't stay for longer. I do have another appointment. Thank you all so much for hearing me out.
Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time. Good luck with everything. All right, and now we're going to go over to our ECCC, and Dana, if you'll take it away.
Okay, I was muted. Sorry about that. I am Dana Freeling, a native Texan from Dallas, and I continue to be a Texas voter. I'm currently chair of DA Finland, and I am a leader of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council. We are delighted to extend a warm welcome today to Jenny Sue, also running for the office of Land Commissioner. Jenny is a community organizer, parent, attorney, small business owner, and proud Democrat. She is the founder and leader of Immunize Texas, a grassroots network dedicated to supporting pro-vaccine legislation. Jenny also worked in the past as a patent litigator and a science teacher, in addition to owning a small retail business. Her history of advocating at the state capitol, a strong foundation in science, and practical life experience make her the right candidate for Texas. Jenny also serves on the board of a nonprofit that provides assistance to domestic violence and sexual trafficking survivors. She is known for working hard, being smart, and getting the job done. After years of grassroots organizing and advocating at the Capitol, Jenny is now ready to take her determination and drive to the General Land Office and engage in policy making based on science, facts, and common sense. Jenny lives in Austin with her husband, 2 children, aged 5 and 9, and 2 cats. She works in finance in addition to leading Immunize Texas. Jenny serves on the board of the Asian Family Support Services of Austin and on the Leadership Council for the Austin Asian American Bar Association. We look forward to hearing about your vision, Jenny, for the Office of Land Commissioner. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to repeat, I'm monitoring another Zoom right now where I might have to hop off for 20 seconds. So I'll start, and if I get interrupted, I apologize. So you've heard my background. I just want to add a little bit to that, give you an idea of how I grew up. I think that's a really important part of my story. So I am not somebody that has been part of a wealthy family. I don't have lots of connections. I'm just somebody that is the child of working class Korean immigrants. I actually grew up in a very small rural town. I know what it's like to grow up without health care. I was treated like an other by my community. And I also watched my parents lose their plant nursery business when droughts hit our small town. And it's because of that I know that climate change is real. I've had that experience in my life, and I see how it affects everyday people. So my run for office, for this office particularly, is really based on my passion for science, wanting to serve my community, make sure I take care of Texans, and also help Texas get in front of climate change, because this is the big problem that is on everyone's mind. And it's going to take a team of Democrats to get Texas in place, put action into, put words into action, get policies into place, because if we don't do anything, we're really nearing the precipice of disaster. So I just want to urge you all to get to know me. I'm a fighter, community organizer, and activist. I have experience not only with teaching science to people who don't necessarily have a background in it, but also on working on large projects that require working with people from all different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and I see we need somebody that can bring the science together with the business interests. That's going to be key for our next land commissioner. And I have that skill set, relying on my experience in law, in science, in working together with folks for Immunize Texas. So that's what I bring to the table. And I do know we're short on time, so I'd love to open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We've got a question from our Global Black Caucus, the same question that we just asked Jay. James, would you like to go ahead?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for taking time out. How will you ensure that people of color have the same equal opportunity during a national disaster to have access to funding to rebuild their livelihoods in their living conditions?
So I will say right now, our current land commissioner, who is George P. Bush, it's an open seat though, he's running for attorney general now. What I've seen from talking to people on the ground, people who have interacted with the General Land Office, is a general disrespect for regular everyday people. The office has been run in a very political way, where things like, the Hurricane Harvey disaster relief funds, people in Houston have been penalized by the matrix that was set up. I'm somebody that puts people first because I know what it's like to struggle, because I've had those experiences in my own life. So when it comes to disaster relief, I want to make sure that people of color and other marginalized communities are not left out in the process. Really, we need to work with local leaders, community organizers on the ground to find out, when it comes to disaster relief, who needs the money first, who is hurting the most, and put those people first when we do the distributions. And then in terms of generally how the land office is operated, I think people of color, we are at a time right now where Texas has seen 95% of its growth come from people of color. So I want to make sure, especially because I am a woman of color, that we're not overseen, that we are not left out of the process. It goes everywhere from not only how we interact, whether it's applying for those disaster relief funds, or when it comes to veterans of color, veterans that are LGBTQ, that they are not left out as well. I think the General Land Office has a lot of work to do with being transparent about how they make their decisions, and also engaging in outreach to make sure that folks do not get left out because maybe they don't have access to broadband, maybe they don't have access to a computer. These are the issues that so many Texans face, and it's why we don't end up with offices that actually serve the people. And it shouldn't be that way. We need to have agencies and leaders that serve Texas and the needs that are out there. So I hope that answered your question. I'm trying to monitor two Zooms, so just a little bit all over the place. But if there's more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
We've got some questions from our participants. Here's one from our chat. And whether or not you believe that the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal is viable in light of COP26.
So I think in general, so my scientific approach to things is really what's necessary, because I don't know that those kinds of numbers are feasible. I think a lot of the technologies that are being proposed to address climate change, to address the rising temperatures, I don't know that there's always experts on both sides. And we need someone that can listen to all the evidence, that isn't going to invest a lot of money into something that does not work, that is not feasible. There are a lot of questions on the table. Will these technologies that show a lot of promise, can they be scaled up to the needs that that Texas has? And will it be something that can be part of a global effort? And this is why I'm a big advocate for making sure that not only as the General Land Commissioner, I would take care of things that are under my direct authority, but also as an advocate. I would be a good Democrat going to the Texas State Legislature, going to DC, arguing in favor of getting a team together, because for climate change, things don't end at our borders. Things don't end in a community. They are global problems. So we need to have a team approach. We need to be collaborating with others. We need to establish those partnerships if we want to have the chance to actually make a change, get in front of climate change. And I'll say, Texas has a vested interest in making sure that we're part of that team, because we have the coastal bend, because we have our entire economy resting on refineries and developments out there that are going to be subject to the next storm surge, to the next hurricane. There are a lot of reasons that this sort of reactive approach is not going to work. We need someone that can be proactive and actually talk about the future in a realistic way and what's going to work, because, I hate to be doomsday about it, but I know that for the young voters out there, for so many of us, this is the pressing issue of our time.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jenny. We have one more question if you've got time for it. Our Progressive Caucus would like to ask another one.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can I just pause one second? I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, I can listen to the question, but I might have to hop off. So
Okay,
please.
no problem.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jenny. We just wanted to ask, The Guardian reported in December that oil companies' profits soared to $1.74 billion last year, as also US gas prices rose. What plans do you have to end fossil fuel subsidies and overcome resistance from powerful oil and gas companies and lobbies when you're in office?
Sure. So I get asked this question a lot. Again, I have that experience of working with people from all different sides who have their own priorities and interests that don't always, they're not always in harmony. There's often a clash. Immunize Texas, for instance, is a nonpartisan group. So I've had to work with conservatives. I've had to work with independents. And that's really just part of the job when you're a land commissioner. You cannot ignore oil and gas. However, I see signs that even in the private sector, corporations are ready to address the issue of climate change. When I go to places like West Texas, for instance, the parking structures have solar panels installed. If they had such a deep faith in their product, why are they engaging in installing solar panels? And the families that work for oil and gas, when I speak to them, they tell me they're aware of the fact that fossil fuels will run out eventually. They want their children to have bright futures. They are telling them to do things like take a class that might prepare them for a job in wind or solar or geothermal. So then the community is there, the support is there. The private sector is ready to come to the table. We just need the government piece. And if we can do that, we have a chance of really putting something together that will work for Texas, that will get us ready for the climate change problems that we face. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'll be right back.
All good, thank you. All right. We'll be joined shortly by Greg Kasar from the Texas 35 Congressional District. I'm just waiting for them to get logged in. We'll finish up with Jenny here in a second when she's back with her call. Caitlin, would you like to go ahead and let us know what Texas 35 looks like now, because there have been significant changes to that district?
Hi, yes, okay. Well, I am not a Texas 35 voter, but I would be interested if anyone on the call is, if you want to let us know in the chat. But Texas 35 is a district that was redrawn in the recent redistricting process. It is a Hispanic majority district. It is a working class majority district. That has been drawn to connect parts of Travis County, where Austin is located, down to Bexar County in San Antonio via Interstate 35. So it's an exciting race for the primary season, as it is expected to be a blue seat. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to say, Jennifer.
Oh, good. Oh, great. Ginny is back. I think we can take one more question from the participants then. What is your position on biofuels as green energy? And let's see if there's anything else. Let's start with that.
So again, this is the kind of thing where I would love to sit down with experts and talk about whether this is actually feasible on the scale that we would need for Texas. I've had my own experience working with folks who have done this kind of project. I think it sounds great in small projects. The question is, do we have the capacity? Do we have the ability to scale this up to a point that it would be beneficial for Texas? You know, there are so many amazing things that are out there being developed. And I think it would be prudent to really sit down and evaluate all those options with a scientific mind, but also bringing in business interests so that they can have their perspective expressed, as well as talking with the people on the ground who would be affected by those developments. You know, for instance, we see in places like West Texas, they are the victims to industry ruining their aquifers. We have things like fracking going on in West and South Texas that really haven't been taking into account the people who live there and how it will affect their water supply. Now, in terms of what I see for the future of Texas, you know, I believe in people. That's something that's really core to my belief system. I look at, for instance, the developments we've made in terms of electric cars, and it gives me a lot of hope. I believe that people have that ability to innovate, to meet the demands that are facing us, to come up with those solutions if we just put in the investment. And that's, again, where we need a good Democrat to be the next Texas Land Commissioner that can really use the vision and backbone that they have to put those actions into place, take policies and make them into reality. And so that's what I bring to the table.
Excellent. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate answering all of our questions and that you gave us your time, and we wish you the best of luck. And thank you so much for speaking to Democrats Abroad. And please do let anyone you know who lives overseas know that we're out here and that we're trying our best to find out what's going on back home and stay up to date on the lay of the land. And we really appreciate everything.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Solidarity from Texas.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Jenny. All right, Caitlin, I'm going to turn back over to you again. We welcome Greg on the call, and Caitlin, I'll let you do an introduction.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our next guest, Greg Kasar. He's an Austin City Council member, first elected in 2014. He was the youngest city council member ever elected in Austin. And as we just mentioned, he's running in the Texas 35 congressional Democratic primary. He's a Texas native, a graduate of UVA, and he has a really impressive record of achievement on the Austin City Council. Among many successes, he authored the paid sick days laws that passed in Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas. He worked to raise wages for Austin's lowest paid employees from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour with healthcare benefits. And he also kept immigrant families from being separated by leading the statewide campaign against Texas's Show Me Your Papers law, and much, much more. So Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to turn things over to you now.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm Greg Cassada, and I'm running here for Texas's 35th district because I've been really inspired by people's resilience and how people haven't given up here in these last couple of years that have been so hard for so many people. As was mentioned, you know, I worked diligently, and I have worked diligently on the city council for 7 years to do things like pass laws guaranteeing folks paid sick days. But what wasn't mentioned is that our all Republican Supreme Court in a really biased decision right in the middle of a global pandemic when people needed sick time the most, blocked that law, really with no real precedent. Those laws and those lawsuits have failed. Those types of lawsuits have failed in the past in other states, but here people were deprived of that right to sick time. In Texas, when we were delivering blankets to people during that winter freeze, when we were trying to take care of folks in that, really acute climate crisis moment, we had Ted Cruz getting on a plane, going to the beach. We had our governor, blaming windmills and renewable energy when really it was his failure to listen to baseline federal regulations and recommendations that were one of the prime culprits for lots and lots of our constituents freezing cold and some folks even dying. And so it became really clear to me that working Texans deserve leadership that has a proven track record of delivering on progressive change and that's going to stand up and override some of these worst decisions that we see coming down at the state level. I'm really committed to engaging folks all throughout the district, including Democrats Abroad, my own sister. I want to be connected to the group to make sure that she can send in her ballot into Texas and into Austin from abroad. And I come from an immigrant family and believe in the connection between all of us as people. My great-grandmother was born in Mexico, but when her husband was killed there in the war in the teens and the 20s, she walked over pregnant with my grandmother into El Paso, Texas. And then after she grew up there for a little while, they went back to Mexico. That's where my grandmother grew up. My parents then moved from Mexico after growing up there here to Texas. And that kind of story of our diversity and our connection is really what I believe is the core of being American and Texan, is that we look out for one another, we take care of one another, and that we should be welcoming to people. And that's exactly what it is that we need to see reflected in Congress. It's that kind of story of people that are willing to go the extra mile, as we've seen our healthcare professionals do, as we've seen people do in the winter storm, as we've seen people do as teachers in our classrooms do. That's exactly the kind of energy and spirit that we know is going to win us things like Medicare for all, or $15 an hour minimum wage, or compassionate and comprehensive immigration reform, a cancellation of student debt, protecting our federal employees and Social Security benefits and retirements. That energy we know exists here in Texas. And I've been asked why I would want to go from being in the progressive majority on a city council, passing significant policy, to being in the progressive minority in Congress. And I think that's the wrong question to ask, because I believe that a vast majority of Texans believe in reproductive justice and believe that we should have Roe v. Wade be the law of the land rather than this abortion ban that we have right now affecting so many people in Texas. The vast majority of working Texans believe in LGBTQ equality and that Black Lives Matter, and that we shouldn't be, catering so much to corporations and instead should be supporting working people. And so my work alongside you all's, if I'm able to win this seat, is to be able to bring that voice of the majority of people to DC and make sure that the majority voice is heard rather than continued minority dominance by things like voter suppression. And so I just really appreciate the chance to be here. I would really love each and every one of your support. I'm proud to recently have received the endorsement of Senator Elizabeth Warren, the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the Congress, along with the Texas AFL-CIO and all of our major sort of progressive organizations like the Sunrise Movement, but would love to earn each of your, every single one of your support, whether you're in the district or not. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Greg. I don't know if you've got a few minutes for questions.
I do.
All right, excellent. Then we'll go straight to the Progressive Caucus. They've got a question for you.
All right, it's me again. Let's see. Yeah, so as you've mentioned, on the Austin City Council, you've successfully worked to pass many progressive policies that we've already mentioned. How do you plan to deliver on these kinds of changes for all Texans and all Americans at the federal level?
And sorry, you said all of these different kinds of changes. How do you think we can deliver on the broader agenda?
Minimum wage increases, affordable housing options, paid sick leave, these kinds of policies you've been discussing.
Yeah, I think a really key way to deliver on that is to have new members come out and speak out against the way that business is done in DC, to get rid of things like the filibuster, to make sure that we provide statehood to those places that have been denied statehood, try to provide voting rights to every single working person in our country, because right now the system is rigged against the majority will becoming policy. On top of trying to reshape the system that I think really blocks a lot of progressive policy, we've also seen how new freshman members of Congress that are willing to speak out can make immediate change. And so something I'm inspired by is how last year we saw Cori Bush, freshman member of Congress from St. Louis, go and set up a sit-in and sleep out on the steps of the US Capitol when it looked like the eviction moratorium was about to lapse. And she went and did that and really led then a national movement of attention to that issue. And that created the opportunity for the president actually to change course and extend that eviction moratorium, keeping thousands of people in their homes. And so I'm committed to broader movement building across the country, building organizational strength, reshaping and reforming our institutions so that we can have progressive policy pass, and then to speak out and use the skills that we've built as activists and organizers here in Texas to be able to take care of people here at home.
Excellent, thank you. How much time have you got left? Because we have several questions, but we want to.
Yeah, I saw there's a bunch. I could do a lightning round if we want.
Okay.
I've probably got about six minutes or so till my next one that I got to hop into.
Perfect. We've got a question from our Global Women's Caucus, and then we'll take some from the chat.
Yep. Hi, Greg. It's good to hear how progressive you are on women's issues. We are really upset in the Women's Global Caucus about SB 8. So here's my question. If you truly believe in our right to reproductive freedom, what will you do to get rid of SB 8?
Everything in my power, and we keep on coming up with more and more ideas. So my fiance is talks to women every single day as part of her job that have had to leave Texas and go to Louisiana, Oklahoma, and New Mexico for abortion care. And so while I'm over here doing this Zoom call, she's inside the house having those conversations. And so that's what we talk about every day, is that there is a real significant impact every single day that is happening to people in Texas. So there's a spectrum of what we not want to do. I know you said lightning round, but this is so important right now. Part of what we've done is push local governments to provide funding to help people travel if they need to travel. And so I've helped set aside nearly $500,000 over the last couple of budget cycles to help support people in our community that are affected by these Texas laws, make sure they can get the care that they need. And we need to push every city to do that. We need to support the lawsuits. And part of her work and mine and lots of others is to be able to show how unconstitutional this law is. I believe in expanding and reforming the Supreme Court and having term limits in an expanded court, because a lot of the things people say they're worried about with an expanded court is actually what we're getting right now with this court. And so I think we need to, make sure that we have an institution there that actually reflects the will of the people. I fully support the laws that would make Roe v. Wade law and also repeal the Hyde Amendment. And so I would fight for that diligently. And I think part of getting rid of the filibuster is critical for that. And also getting rid of senators like Ted Cruz, who are so unpopular here in Texas, and really making sure we're driving up voter turnout in areas like mine that have low voter turnout, to make sure that maybe we don't just have to negotiate just with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, that it might be nice if we have other senators that can help us make it law of the land, since we can't rely just on the courts right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. If you have time for one more, we've got one last quick question. Otherwise, we totally understand. We have a question about veterans. For example, right now, veterans living abroad are having trouble getting vaccinations. And what would you do to help support veterans?
I really appreciate that question, because I was thinking about how I hadn't had enough time to talk about that. Austin and San Antonio, lots of veterans, especially lots of veterans coming out of San Antonio and all of Texas. So this will be a particular focus of mine. I'm interested in being on Veterans Affairs as far as a committee assignment goes, because and in part I think it's a place where we can really push both for constituent services. To part of what I've been committed to as a council member is recognizing some of the most important power you can use is is just being able to tell the stories of constituents and push agencies to take care of individual constituents. So that's something I'm committed to doing, because even though you're only one of over 400 in DC as a member of Congress, I would be one of two representing Austin and one of 4 or 5 in the city of San Antonio. And so I'd be really committed to really taking care of my constituents abroad, especially veterans and people who are in active service. And then also pushing my colleagues, if I'm hearing from other people, for example, in Texas, but who might not be hearing back. And so I'm really, as a council member, I recognize that while I might want to pass sweeping renters' rights policies or protections for foreclosures, that a lot of the most important work I've gotten to do is that individual message from somebody that's being foreclosed on, or that individual message from somebody that's having trouble getting their child vaccinated. And that's what I'm committed to doing for veterans too, because I know that folks abroad, whether it's accessing their Social Security card or Social Security benefits, accessing care as a veteran, that kind of stuff is just so important for members of Congress to step up and do.
Greg, we thank you so much for joining us today and for all of your words about what your vision is for Texas 35. If you have any final thoughts, we'd love for you to share those with us. And we just appreciate you taking your time to come today and to speak to us. And please let any overseas voters that you know, tell them that we're here, that we're ready to support them, and that we're eager to help them get their vote counted in Texas and anywhere
Well, you're
else.
about to have a new member in my sister right after this, and so I appreciate it. As I was coming on, I thought about that. I was like, oh man, that's something I should connect Catalina with. So thank you all so much for having me. I'm sorry that I promised lightning round answers, and then was told your questions were so good that I felt wrong making them lightning round answers. But just would appreciate any and all support. We are going to be putting up some volunteer phone banks pretty soon in case anybody wants to participate calling into Texas. I'm going to post my website here in the chat in case you want to see more about me or the other issues we didn't have time to talk about. And of course, anybody that's willing to volunteer or chip in a little bit of money. This is a expensive endeavor. And since I only found out that I was running for Congress, or that there was even the potential of this idea around Halloween, and it's all over in about 4 or 5 weeks in the primary, any and all support's really appreciated. So I'll put my website there in the chat. Thank you all so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. All right, I'll turn it over to Candace Kerriston again, our international chair.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Greg, for joining us. And really a warm thank you to everyone who was able to join us today and speak to our constituency as Americans abroad. It's very exciting, again, to see candidates stateside taking interest in the issues that are so important to us as Americans living overseas. Again, I just wanted to repeat who you heard from again. That was Jay Kleberg and Jenny Sue, both running for Texas Land Commissioner, Lee Merritt running for Texas Attorney General, and Greg Kasar running for Texans' 35th Congressional District. Just want to emphasize again that Democrats Abroad does not endorse any candidates for the duration of the Texas primary, and all candidates running for these offices were invited to join us for today's event. Before you go, Jennifer and I just have a few more points. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we are doing as Democrats Abroad to get out the vote, not just in the March primary, but in the November general election. Those of you who vote in Texas may have just received a call from us recently. We're currently calling through our thousands of members who vote in Texas. And a huge thank you to all of our phone bankers and our phone banking team who has put together those calling campaigns, again, to make sure that every Texan abroad knows about the primary and is getting their ballot, not just for the primary, but for all 2022 races. If you are interested in phone banking yourself, we are looking for help. We're going to have phone banking for other battleground states coming up. The next round, Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, starting in March. And if you would like to help us, we would love to have your help. One of our volunteers is going to put the link in the chat so that you can find out how to become a phone banker yourself. And last but not least, I did just want to ask very seriously if you would consider making a donation to help Democrats Abroad get out the vote with Texans and all voters living overseas. Many of you might not know this, but Democrats Abroad is an all-volunteer organization. Everyone who helped with today's event, all of those phone bankers making calls do it because they know that this matters, but these important projects do need funding. So if you are able to chip in and help our outreach, that would be so greatly appreciated. We are the only group reaching out to Americans overseas this methodically. And we know that that goes a long way when we look at those results in 2020 and the difference we made in close races. So again, if you're able to phone bank yourself, if you are able to make a donation to help our cause, we would be so grateful. And speaking of being grateful, again, just a huge thank you to Texans Abroad for organizing today's event and to all of the candidates who are able to join us. I'll toss it over to Jennifer, who will say a few words about voting from abroad, just if you have any other questions, and also invite you to the second event in the series where we'll hear from some other candidates later this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Candace. We really appreciate everyone coming today, and I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. And please remember, we will be hearing from candidates for Lieutenant Governor, from more candidates for Attorney General and Texas 35 this coming Wednesday. And the link that you use today to log in is the same link. That meeting is slightly later. It's Wednesday evening at 2 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central European time. We look forward to seeing you again there. And also, remember that our Texas primary ballots have started going out. If you have requested yours already and you haven't gotten it, check your email, check your spam. If you need help, please reach out to us. You can use that Texans-Abroad at Democrats Abroad email address. We are happy to help you with any voting problems that you have. You can also use our wonderful voting guide. If Eileen, if you could pop that in the voting guide in there. We've got some great ballot return instructions. I know it can be quite frustrating to have to print your ballots out and origami everything and all the different envelopes. And we've got a great guide for that. If you need any help with it, please just reach out. We're here for you. We're here to support you voting from abroad. Do remember deadlines are coming up. If you have not requested your ballot yet, you have until February 8th to request the full ballot. If you intend to return to the state, you will be sent the full ballot. If you marked that your return is uncertain, you will only receive the federal ballot. Happy to clarify any questions about that as well. And your ballot must be postmarked by Election Day, March 1st, and received by the 7th at the latest. So don't delay, get them in the mail. They have to be postal mailed back, and just let us know. We hope that you've enjoyed this discussion, and if you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email, and we would love for you to join us at our upcoming Texans Abroad planning meeting on the 12th of February. And please send us a message. Let us know what you think if you had any other questions. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all of the caucuses who prepared these really thought-provoking questions. Thank you for co-hosting with us. Thank you for your time. And thank you to Candace for giving us this platform to do this. We really appreciate everything. All right, and we'll end the recording now and end our Facebook Live. If you'd like to stick around for a few minutes and have any questions now.